So welcome everyone to the panel discussion this afternoon. I hope a good day in the other sessions. Our title session is Cloud-Enabled Data Platforms as a Driver of Innovation and Cultural Change. And I am joined by two special guests, and I will allow them to introduce themselves in a moment, but just a bit of background on myself. So my name is Tim Vincent. I'm a solution engineer at Confluent, and at Confluent we are looking, or our mission is to set data in motion through a streaming platform that is built on Apache Kafka. One of the things I'm going to ask the other two panelists is what they're looking forward to most once we're fully out of lockdown. So as I'm going to ask them that question, I thought perhaps I should also start with that question. So what I'm looking forward to most coming out of lockdown is just before lockdown 1.0, we actually bought a camper van. And it's had very limited use to date. We've been sleeping on it on the drive, for example, for a few nights. But yeah, very much looking forward to riding out into the sunset in my camper van in a few weeks' time. So perhaps over to you, Mike. Perhaps you could introduce yourself and let us know what you're looking forward to once we finally get unlocked.
Thanks, Tim. And I think that camper van could be very valuable in this age of staycation.
Yes, it's gone up in value. It's one of my shrewder investments.
Even if you had to stare at it parked in front of your house.
Yes.
So Mike Foster. I head up partners and business development at Privacera. I've worked in the data space for the last 15 years with Privacera for the past year, and we work in the governance space, providing assurance for discovery of sensitive data, access control and encryption for cloud-based analytical services and assets. And we're obviously a global company. And yeah, so what am I looking forward to when I get out of lockdown? I actually really enjoyed lockdown, Tim. But as I mentioned, a bit like your one-year-old camper van, I'm 1 year at Privacera, and I've yet to meet a single colleague. I've never been to an office or a headquarters. Wow. So yeah, it's all been quite surreal. So yeah, David.
Thank you, Mike. And Dave, we can't see you, but we won't worry so much about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that is, because I thought I'd enabled everything. So apologies for that. And weirdly, I can see myself on the screen. So not quite sure what's going on. I like you both have got a track record in data which stretches back a little while. The summit's called Data and the Machine, and I think I've always been much more interested in the data than the machine. And I think that the machine parts will come and go. We'll switch from one technology to another technology. As long as the technology supports what we want to do, that's good and fine. But for me, without the data and without supporting the requirements for the data, all of it is just the machine. And I think we need to get the benefit from the machine, and the benefit is only derived by understanding our data, making sure that we can serve up the data for those folk who need it for the purposes that they require. And I think that the three of us, I think, have got a common interest in that, because whilst I'm not from a technologist bent on this call, I think the three of us are all about how we enable data to the consumers ultimately to do things which are of benefit to the organizations. So leaving lockdown, I don't know, I've got mixed feelings about it. I think, Michael, I'm joining a new organization. I left HSBC a couple of weeks ago, and like you, it's a very virtual experience at the moment. And I think that's good and bad in some ways. I mean, I don't necessarily miss the commute that much, although that is something of interest. But I think we all need human contact, and that's the bit I am looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. More hugs. Okay, thank you, Mike and Dave. So perhaps sort of a question to get us started in the area of cloud. So how is the adoption of cloud-enabled data platforms going in your organization or with the customers that you are interacting with? So how is it the new Nevada, or is it an easy, well-trodden path?
Shall I kick off on this, David?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think, by virtue of working with Fortune 500 customers, everyone has adopted in some shape or form a cloud-enabled data platform, and it's, they've crossed the chasm. Some of them are migrating their on-prem data lakes, and they're working through, the challenges that presents. In fact, my colleague, Syed Mahmood, who spoke just in the earlier session here before on governance, he put some statistics up on that. And, recently we did a survey of those customers, and 70% of cloud migration and analytical projects are now more complex due to compliance and privacy regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So very complex. Then you've got guys who are already in the cloud. They have data scientists, they have analysts, and as we know, they love their data, they love to do what they want, and they're not even sure if there's sensitive data there today and it has governance applied. So you got this really interesting dichotomy of guys who are preparing in detail and understanding their sensitive data before they go into the cloud and make sure the process is in place. And then you've got guys who are post facto trying to adapt to this new world. That's what I'm seeing certainly across our customers. David?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on from my experience as well, Mike. And I think, that we've kind of held out the dawn of cloud as this great new gold rush. Suddenly, all of our data will be available, and we'll be able to make magical use of it. And I think the reality is slightly different. The reality is that we've swapped one set of problems, which is how you maintain your physical infrastructure, how you can spin up extra capacity within seconds, compared with olden times when you had to submit hardware requests and so on, which might take many months to come through, and then you've got to install all the software on the machine and so on and so forth. Nowadays, we can trade those constraints with the new constraints, and the new constraints really are, if you put all of this data somewhere on the cloud, actually, where is it? And how do we still access it? Because it doesn't disappear. It's still in the same kind of tin boxes and requires wires to send it around from place to place. But we've now got questions about, well, who gets access to it? And if we are using a third-party public provider, of course, who within that third-party public provider can see what? And how secure is it? How are we preventing unauthorized access to it? Where does it reside? Are the hosting constraints being taken into account? Is geofencing in place so that a certain jurisdiction's data in certain data sets hosted in the right data centers? How do we verify that? How can we prove that if we're asked those kinds of questions? And I think those kind of more organizational governance management domains have kind of made the rush to cloud a little bit more complicated. And then I think the other thing that I'd like to also raise is that a hybrid technical infrastructure is not going to disappear anytime soon. And in fact, I think it's becoming almost more complicated by the day. And then we've got all sorts of questions about, well, if part of your data is in a particular technology on-prem and part of it is in a public cloud provider, how do you get access when folk need to join those sets of data together to provide some benefit to the consumer? So I think the realization is that we need to rush into cloud quite carefully and make sure that as we're rushing into cloud, we're putting the right solutions in place to tackle the new sets of problems that we face.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're spot on with the hybrid cloud discussion as well. A lot of I mean, clearly you have a background with HSBC, so a lot of the big banks that I talk to, when in discussion, absolutely we're cloud first. Everything all new projects, all new use cases must go cloud first. But we still have this whole legacy of infrastructure that we still need to maintain and look after, and there's no way we can put some of that data into public cloud. The other thing that comes out as well as sort of hybrid, on-premise to cloud and the interchange of the data there. A lot of the customers I talk to as well want a multi-cloud, which adds as a whole new dimension. That's normally through being pushed through regulation and perhaps not having the faith in one public cloud provider being able to remain online 24/7. So
I think that's spot on, Tim, and I think there's something that comes out of that as well, because part of the lure of sending data to cloud to get it back again a little bit later, part of the lure to do that is the capabilities that cloud offers in terms of, if we think about, I don't know, Google AutoML as an example, to be able to analyze documents with a sophistication which would take our organizations a while to develop. These are kind of pre-built components within that cloud infrastructure. But as you rightly point out, Tim, one of the problems that we need to then think about is if our organizations become highly dependent on any cloud providers' extra capabilities, if you will, then what happens if we need to exit that cloud provider, and how do we still give a solution which works across cloud providers and also on-prem if we're highly reliant on a particular cloud provider's capability? And I think that kind of also says then that we need to make sure that our solutions are themselves highly portable. We create them once and hopefully we maintain them once. What we don't want to do is every time we get a requirement for a change, we say, oh, well, we've looked after it in Azure. Now we're going to tackle Google, and then later we'll go on to AliCloud. We can't really keep pace with the rate of change. If every single time we've got some changes that come through, we've got to interpret those for the particular flavor of cloud provider that we're using. And that means that we need more solutions which work across the cloud providers and have a highest common denominator bedrock to what they deliver, but also allow us to kind of make the changes once to maintain one set of infrastructure specification, if that makes any sense. So,
yeah.
Unfortunately, I think that's the ideal state, though, David. I mean, the reality is we've got a burden of complexity, and as you said earlier, between these instances of private clouds, public clouds, then you got the additional third-party services, and then all of it is about the velocity of decision making, building these projects, success, and the trade-off. So I hope we can achieve what you say between platforms, but I think there's a gap at the moment, and we all feel it in projects.
Yeah. So Mike, what is needed around data governance in these kind of hybrid and multi-cloud type environments? Is there a solution for us there today, or is this something that's going to have to evolve as we and other companies adopt cloud?
Well, I think some of it thematically talks to what David is. I mean, you look at third-party services, whether you're Snowflake, who announced a lot of governance enhancements this week, which are native to just Snowflake. But that presents options, for vendors like us to take advantage of those and layer those into other governance platforms, so you can start adhering across multi-cloud environments, multiple data services, attribute-based tags for common policies. So write once, enforce everywhere, similar to what David was describing. So I think there's a responsibility to the cloud providers to open up and start bringing that together, so we can get that conjoined view for governance. But today, we can do that on an individual basis. And the key is removing friction for the analytical community, because they don't want to hear it's going to be 30 days or 40 days until they get access to a data set. To somebody's comment earlier, that moment is gone. You've missed that window of opportunity to take advantage of it for whatever value. So compressing that down, we need to look at how do we get processes and businesses where we can delegate the decisions on these logical data sets to the line of business, to the stewards. Meanwhile, IT still looks after the tools, the data, and the actual policies themselves. So I think we've got some evolution on the business process piece as well, Tim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's useful. So, so part of our question was, or quite part of the title for the panel was around a driver of innovation and cultural change using data platforms in the cloud. Do you see that? Do you see it as a driver for innovation, for faster development, perhaps for new applications? Is the adoption of cloud making our developers more creative? Can we get products out the door quicker? What kind of sort of cultural changes has this cloud enabled?
It's a tremendous question. I think the answer has got to be yes, but it's quite a qualified yes, and I think it really comes back to, what are folk doing on the ground? And I think, even today, software engineers only have a certain amount of hours that they can work on stuff during the day. If they're spending less time worrying about how they spin up containers, that liberates that effort to thinking about, well, what could we do now we've got the infrastructural constraints removed? What are the things that we can do which are more geared towards the organization's future? And I think that transmission of load from just doing the humdrum, creating the infrastructure definitions and making that kind of reusable capabilities, being able to switch from that and saying, well, that's already taken care of, actually, thanks very much. What we'll do now is focus our efforts on the more creative, the more innovative, and ultimately the more beneficial activities that our organizations need to embrace. How successful that is, I couldn't really give you a measure, Tim, but in the way that I look at the work, surely, isn't it?
Yeah.
But,
yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. The number of times I've seen customers, and we want to run, say, a proof of concept with Kafka, for example, and I say, oh well, we'll start next week. We'll do it for a couple of weeks. We'll prove out this. I say next week. It'll take us 6 months to secure the VMs and the infrastructure that we need to set up. Whereas now, when I go see a customer, they've already tested some, a cloud version up in Confluent Cloud, for example. So, in terms of productivity, it's well up there, and means that the developers can then, as you say, eliminate friction and blockers in actually helping them concentrate on the business needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think my experience is similar as yours, Tim. We both come from open source.
Yeah.
Today we have our SaaS platform. Working with large enterprises, it is usually the first thing they look at to get an experience of our product. We manage the updates when they go into production. So gone are the days when we're doing forklift upgrades that took 12 months to plan, 6 months to roll out. We're managing them at a cadence with all of our customers. So I think, and also we're responding to our customers' needs through that cadence as well in terms of enhancing the products. So I think as a SaaS vendor, it's changed for the customer experience, as everybody knows, and for us in terms of the velocity of what we can deliver to everybody.
Yeah, good point.
And also we removed the overhead management of the open source piece, the components and complexity there for Dave's people. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So so do we? So some of the customers there's sort of two sort of buckets of customers that I talk to. There's a growing set of customers who are trying to follow the Netflix, LinkedIn, Amazon approach of being sort of born in the cloud, so that everything is sort of the whole business is run cloud first. Things like challenger banks and some of the new taxi services, Uber and Lyft and so on. And then there's a number of another bucket of customers who have been around for a long time. I put HSBC in that in that bucket, but also some of the customers I work with, such as Nationwide, Building Society, for example. They have a lot of legacy databases, a lot of legacy kits. They have mainframe all in place. It's not going away anytime soon. What's the sort of best approach, do you think, of getting cloud enabled for these type of customers? Do they spin out a cool company with a cool name that just focuses on cloud first? Or is it going to be that they'll have to, it's going to be a period of years before they embrace data platforms of the cloud? Dave, any thoughts?
Yeah, HSBC, I think it's been operating for about 150 years.
Okay.
And yeah, we've got a few legacy systems, I would say, in place there. I think it's a brilliant question, Tim. I think, if we looked around the organizations of the globe, not that many have taken the brave step of saying those legacy systems are just going to completely replace those and redevelop, our future along new lines. So I think really we shouldn't try and think about this being an all or nothing. The challenge is not to switch, the legacy systems off, kind of one at a time. You can envisage someone working through multiple data centers going, great, it was a lovely system, but we don't need it anymore. I think what we need to, the way you framed the question was absolutely excellent. I think it was something that Mike mentioned as well. I think we need to look at a componentized approach to switching these systems off. And that means wherever possible, starting to define new capabilities and making sure that those new capabilities have the possibility of being cloud first. They're cloud native, they're born in the cloud. And what we can then do is take a strategy which says, well, the legacy systems that we've got that used to do that work, we can now send the data flows to and from our new cloud-based capability, and then we can slowly starve off the role of those legacy systems to the point where we can think about switching them off. I think in certain areas, if we looked at, if we look at trade, for instance, and we look at the advent of blockchain and much more open style API provision, I think that gives us another. We start to again componentize and make use of new technology, which replaces what the old mainframes used to do, but in a much more enlightened, much more open marketplace, much more ecosystem-centric approach to the capabilities of the future. So I think that was a really nicely framed question, Tim. There, I think that's got to be the way forward, because very few larger organizations globally, globally prevalent, are going to be able to just summon the budget to say, oh, well, let's redevelop everything, guys. But however, they can take a more incremental approach, and that incremental approach will also allow them to change their data strategy to kind of follow where the requirements are, rather than a data strategy which says, well, let's kind of get everything out of the old systems and put it into the new systems. That kind of monolithic approach, which already says we know where we're going to be in 5 years' time. And I think very few organizations can be that confident with that answer. But if they start to take, much smaller steps, they can be much more nimble in their North Star at any point. So
yeah, absolutely.
I agree. But I mean, Tim, if we look at the other stream, which is those ones who are born in the cloud.
Mhm.
It is clearly, you know, they're reconceptualizing traditional business, whether it's food delivery, taxis, you know, with streaming in itself, but you know, everything. The landscape is changing so rapidly. I mean, it is an adapt or die. I mean, I don't disagree with
Yeah.
Dave. I mean, things will take time. You can't forklift stuff off mainframes that, you know, etc. It can't be done that quickly. But
Yeah.
I think the competitive landscape has never been so aggressive, and obviously the pandemic last 18 months has redefined the rules, in particular for some of the more long players in the market. So
Yeah,
it's going to be a very interesting time ahead of us.
Yeah, most definitely.
Fully agree with those points there, Mike. And I think what COVID has shown us is that, you know, I'm not even quite sure, but 18 months ago, was any of us even talking about it or thinking what, you know, that everyone would be working from home or not working and so on. We had no clue that this was coming, and yet such a monumental shockwave can come from nowhere. And I think all organizations need to take that as a warning sign, because it's not going to be that these shockwaves stop coming. They will continue to come towards us. And to your point, Mike, they can be completely wrong footing for the larger organizations, because they weren't aware it was on its way, and now they're suddenly hit with that shockwave. They don't know how to respond. So fully agree with those sentiments, Mike. They need to look at COVID and think there are going to be lots of mini COVIDs, not the same, you know, not the same in nature by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the things we saw suddenly was, you know, the switch to virtual communication, which happened almost overnight, and people staying at home, and so that had a massive impact on, you know, shopping habits, toilet roll availability, which rings a bell, and you know, and other factors. And I think that organizations need to think we've got to get agile, and that doesn't mean by simply holding agile scrums. It means to start to evolve an innovation capability within the organization that is just scanning ahead and seeing what's coming, and helping the organization to capitalize on new opportunities, and also avoid shockwaves which would disrupt its current business model. So yeah, fully agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we're coming towards the end time of our session. So I just wanted to ask if there's anybody listening who would want to ask a question, just to ping it in the chat, and maybe we could talk about that. But if not, Mike, any final thoughts on the subject of cloud-enabled data platforms?
I think it's an exciting future we have ahead of us. I mean, it's going to move very quickly. I mean, I think the landscape, as David said, has never shifted so quickly. From my lens, looking at governance, you know, we need to have those common modules for automation across the whole landscape. We need to hide the complexity, and we need to make it as frictionless and as seamless for the business users, so we can get the value out of it. And that's, you know, those are going to be the overarching goals for me, Tim, in the near term.
Yeah, thank you. And Dave, any final thoughts?
I think it's going to be a mix, actually. I think we're going to still take our learnings from previous times and carry those with us. And I think for the startups, they need to be careful, because if they will, at some point, if they're successful, lose that startup mentality, they'll grow into more mature organizations. The trick for those guys is to make sure that as they evolve, they don't start to create the processes and mental infrastructure and so on that the larger organizations have today, because that will send them down the same "you're going to be extinct pretty soon" route. And I think they need to look at how they've worked in startup mode mentality and make sure that that mentality carries forward in their processes. But I think I'm with both of you. I think that certainly for the smaller, more nimble organizations, the future looks very, very bright, and they can do things which even a few years ago would have seemed absolutely impossible to achieve, you know, for a 50 or 100 employee startup. And I'm quite optimistic, actually. I think that this is a fresh growth of capabilities and organizations that are going to come soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly in my career, you know, I remember my days at Oracle 10, 15 years ago, where, you know, the cloud was defined as someone else's tin. So, you know, the leaps and bounds we've come since then. And then even 5 years ago, people are always saying, you know, banks will never embrace a public cloud. You know, it's far too risky. And look, you know, look where we are today. It's a given that banks are embracing public cloud. But of course, we need all that governance around that data with GDPR and all the regulation that goes with it. But as I say, for someone who's an old database person, databases have suddenly got cool in the cloud world. So I'm embracing it, and long may it continue. So, okay. Well, thanks very much, Mike and Dave, for your time on your panel. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion and enjoyed the day as well at Data and the Machine. So I think in a couple of minutes we're back for the closing remarks from Phil. So
thanks very much, Dave.
Thanks, it's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, bye.